a Superman action figure in a toy coffin, a blue shirt and red jacket, a first flight in the sun above the Arctic tundra. These are some of the moments that define my Superman fandom. Together on this podcast, we journey across time and media to examine, discover, and reconsider the creative visions that have shaped the Man of Steel. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. This is Krisis Til Death, Part 5. And joining me to discuss the dawn of the Triangle Era is returning guest, Scott Honig. Scott, welcome back.
Thank you so much. As always, it is a great pleasure to be here.
We had another 50-plus issue reading assignment, and we are also now in the second half. We are officially in the second half of this 8-part event covering the period of time immediately post-Crisis on Infinite Earths, all the way up to and including the death and return of Superman, which of course was my entry point into the character. And I just want to take a quick second here, now that we're past the halfway point, just to say that it has been endlessly fascinating to explore this period of Superman. And I mean, I know this will be an obvious statement, especially for people who are well-versed in this era, but I'm just struck by how much these comics that we've been reading and talking about, how they shaped this modern incarnation of Superman that I grew up with. And to now be able to go back and to see everything that was set up in the years leading up to when I started, it's what a gift it's been. And I'm just so appreciative of what this era did. I mean, because again, it really set the tone for the version of the character that's nearest and dearest to myself. So I just wanted to say that, right at the top here. I mean, I know obviously, in the last episode we talked about the post John Byrne period. The big tentpole storyline was Exile. There was a lot more that we unpacked as well. So from that now to this episode here and everything that we're going to be talking about, which I'll lay out in a second, but what are your overall impressions? What are you feeling at this point in the game?
Yeah, so the thing that struck me the most was this shift, this sort of crossing of the threshold into what is much closer to the way that we read comics now. We went from each book, each title having its own creative team and its own storylines and its own through lines, to the necessity of the triangles to lead the reader from one title to the next, because by the time that we get to the end of the group of books that we're reading now, we've got 4 Superman titles. So that's every Wednesday of every month, you've got a Superman book. So this idea of the stories dovetailing out of one book and into another, of certain creators taking the baton from another group of creators and continuing the storyline, that becomes really the way to do it in this era, and to some extent still today.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all of that. And, like I said before, we're going to be talking about the dawn of the Triangle Era. And I know and that's what you're getting at. And I know for the regular Superman fans who are tuning into this, they know what we're talking about. But it's funny because when I announced this lineup of episodes on Facebook, and I posted the episode titles, and this one is Dawn of the Triangle Era. And one of my friends was like, "What's the Triangle Era?" And I was like, "Whoa, you're in for a treat. We'll tell you all about it." But, in case anyone doesn't know, like that friend of mine who, will likely be listening, or if you need a little refresher, there were, of course, multiple Superman titles. And at the beginning of our reading assignment for this episode, there were 3 titles. By the time we get to the end of our reading assignment for this episode, there were 4. So there were 4 monthly Superman titles. And of course, each series had its own numbering system. But then a few issues into our reading assignment here, they started utilizing these triangle numbers. So on the cover of each issue, there would be a yellow triangle. Or I don't know that it was yellow initially. I'm actually, now that I'm saying it, I'm like, actually, was it yellow? It eventually became yellow if it wasn't initially.
It's yellow in my head.
Yellow, yeah. And so it gave you the reading order across the 4 titles, and it would reset every year. So it really, between the the level of coordination among all the creative teams and the cohesive style that they all employed, coupled with the triangle numbering system, it really gave you the effect of a weekly Superman adventure, especially once that fourth title entered the picture. And even though it's not part of this run of episodes, a few years later, we would get Superman Man of Tomorrow, a quarterly title, because DC just could not stand it that there were a few weeks throughout the year, just a few weeks where they weren't selling you a Superman book. So they were like, I know what to do. And so they came up with the fifth title. So we're not there yet, but we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I feel like the people who know about it, or especially who are reading Superman at the time, they have a very distinct feeling when you say the triangle numbering. It's either it was so helpful and it really guided me through those titles to know what to pick up next and where to go. And even the people who were, picking these up in back issue form and trying to fill in the gaps in their collection so they could know, how to read everything. And then there are other people who hated the triangle numbers, were totally confused by it, didn't get it because they just wanted to read, let's say, Action Comics and wanted to move chronologically through that title, but you really couldn't. You really couldn't. I mean, the style of storytelling was really prohibitive if you weren't buying all four titles. You were missing significant chunks of the story. So people, I feel like, they either love it or they hate it. There are not too many people I've met who are, ambivalent on it.
Yes. I want to circle back to that. I want to lay out for our audience exactly what we're going to be talking about. While I'm doing that, if you wouldn't mind turning up your mic, let's do another couple notches. I know you and I were playing with that before we started recording. While you do that, I want to explain to our audience what we're going to be talking about. And just like the last episode, it's not an issue by issue breakdown. We'll be talking about this overall and we'll talk about the big tentpole storylines, but I think the way we did it last time worked really nicely, where I think a lot of our conversation was framed around the characters and kind of what was going on with each character and core relationship. And I think we'll employ a similar approach here. So here's what we're going to be talking about: Superman 44 through 59, Action 653 through 669, Adventures of Superman 466 through 482, and Man of Steel issues 1, 2, and 3. So all told, that was just over 50 issues. So another heavy lift when it comes to the reading assignment. As far as creators, so for most of this reading assignment, we had Jerry Ordway writing and drawing Superman and Dan Jurgens writing and drawing Adventures of Superman. Towards the end of this reading assignment, they will flip. They'll flip titles. And along with that flip, Tom Grummett will come aboard as penciler for Jerry Ordway on Adventures of Superman. A huge Tom Grummett fan, by the way. I love his stuff. I always have. Yeah. So I was really excited when we got there. And later in the life of this podcast series, we'll cover the Superboy series that he drew, because it was such cool stuff. And then, of course, we have Roger Stern and Bob McLeod on Action Comics, and Louise Simonson and Jon Bogdanove on Man of Steel. In my head, for years and years, 30 years, in my head, it was Jon Bogdanove. And then I looked up a YouTube video where he introduced himself, and it's Jon Bogdanove. That's how the man says his name. You learn something new all the time here on this podcast.
I pronounced it the way that you pronounced it. So I'm going to have to get used to the new pronunciation, but that's cool because I really love his stuff. So I'm going to get it right.
Yeah. And again, so as far as the big storylines that we're going to be talking about here, Dark Knight Over Metropolis, Krisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, time and time again, and Mark of the Krypton Man. And there are obviously other storylines as well, but those are really, that quartet, I think, really makes up the biggest storylines of this time. But I want to circle back to what you were saying before, because I was thinking about this a lot with the Triangle era. And now over the course of this podcast, right, I read a sampling of pre-crisis, sampling of stories from each of the pre-crisis ages. And especially now as I've been making my way through this period that we're talking about, I mean, it's fair to say I've read the vast majority of modern age post-crisis Superman stories. And I think that this Triangle era and the couple of years leading up to it that we talked last time, because even though they didn't have the triangle numbers, they were really, in that mode. I feel like it is the most clearly defined and distinct era And again, because the books were so cohesive. I mean, I feel like this era just had such an identity. Again, you can look at, certainly you can, if I gave you a sampling of random issues, you could pull out what was a Silver Age comic or what was a Golden Age comic. Yes, but it was just such a clearly defined period. The way all of the teams were working in unison. So, to your point, it's like whether you love it or hate it, I mean, it really, I don't know, it really made a mark.
Well, it's funny. I'm of two minds about it because on the one hand, I find it eminently satisfying that you could pick up any of the Superman titles in this time and you're picking up on threads that have been planted elsewhere, right? So the characters really stay consistent, storylines pick up, a lot of juggling amongst the creators, and so it's sort of this neat creative feat in my head too. On the other hand, I understand some of the criticism that what you end up with is a sort of house style across the four titles, rather than letting any one particular writer artist really explore the depths of their creativity. They're still very much married to keeping their stories within the line. And they do deviate a little bit. There are a couple of sort of you get to one-offs and fill-ins here and there. Um, but for the most part, they had to stay consistent with what the others were doing.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree with that. Two things. So it's funny. After we recorded our last episode, and to pull back the curtain a little bit for the audience, it's only been a week since we did part 4. For us, it's been a month. So lest anyone think that we're like blowing through the reading, it's like, nice. We spaced these out. And I appreciate, I know I keep saying this, but I so appreciate that not only you were willing to do this, but you were excited to do this reading project. And, you've been very accommodating as far as scheduling, and I've shifted stuff a little bit because I got to a point where I was like, I need more breathing room. I was like, these are a lot of issues. So I appreciate you rolling with the punches. But after I recorded the last episode, I spoke with mutual friend and previous guest, Rich Roney, and I was like, I'm so enjoying this era. Like, it's great. I said, it's weird because it doesn't, the stories, I look at something like Birthright or Kingdom Come or, some of these other, For All Seasons, some of these self-contained stories, and there's a real, a weight to them and a depth, and, they're kind of in their own category. I enjoy them in a different way, but then something like this, I'm so engaged by it. And, Rich was like, well, and it's the most obvious statement, but it didn't click in my head until he said it. And I was like, oh yeah, he's 100% right. And this, I think, really encapsulates this era. He's like, those other stories, they're like movies. They're these self-contained stories. He goes, this period was like a television show. And it's like, yeah, that is 100% what this was like. And, whenever we talk about the Triangle era, I always think about the creators. And I always say to myself, like, I'm sure there was some, I certainly hope that they enjoyed collaborating with each other. And I'm sure that was an interesting creative exercise. But I've always felt, as a writer in particular, it's like, how stifling must it be if you're only ever writing, part 1 or part 2 of these stories. But I don't know. I guess if you do really think of it as like, well, they were writing an episode in a season of television. That was really the model they were using. So I'm just always, whether you like the stories or not, I always appreciate the level of coordination that went into this.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that metaphor, a movie is typically written by a person. Occasionally, you get a pair of people to write the screenplay. Television series often have that writer's room, right? Where there's a showrunner who in this case would probably be like Mike Carlin, the editor, who's kind of the guiding hand on the stories. But, you've got a team of people who are breaking down stories, splitting them up over episodes. And then each individual writer sort of takes on actually writing the teleplay for each episode. So it still feels like it's the same show, even though each script is technically written by somebody else. So yeah, that I think that metaphor really is apt. So way to go, Rich.
Yeah, I know. He said it. I was like, yeah, that really sums it up. But the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm so glad I'm talking to you about this, because you were on episode 2 of this podcast where we talked about the first half of the Jeff Loeb era of the Superman books from the early 2000s, which, at that point I said was my favorite era. It might be getting edged out by this era, to be honest. Although I wasn't so keen on a big part of what we read for this episode. So I'm still on the fence. This is going to come down to the wire as we get to the end of this run of episodes. I really don't know, but it's neck and neck. But, what was interesting to me was, during that Loeb era, for the beginning part of it, they were still utilizing the triangle numbers. They eventually went away very shortly after Our Worlds at War, which was the last big Loeb era event. But for, again, like a couple of years, they were still utilizing it. But the books were not nearly as interconnected as they were before. And each book, and, we talked about this when we did our episode, each book really did have more of its own niche. So it's like Action was like sexy and cool, and Man of Steel was very sci-fi oriented, and Superman was very classic and really focused on the core supporting cast. And Adventures had a few different writers, so it was kind of all over the place. But for a period of time, it leaned more into the supernatural aspect of the character. So, that was a time where the books really, they were still connected, but not as tightly, and they had more of their own identity. And it's funny. I mean, I'm kind of torn because it's like, I don't know what, I guess it ultimately depends what you want, I suppose, as a reader, right? Because as a weekly adventure, it doesn't work quite as well as what these guys were doing in this period. But there were plenty of crossovers, but there were more opportunities where you could just read, like a few Superman issues in a row and get a complete story, where you really couldn't do that here. So I guess ultimately it's just a matter of taste, I guess, as far as what you actually like. But it was interesting to see how they deviated from this initial and more traditional triangle model in those later years.
Yeah, I'm still even split on whether I think this is like the smartest marketing strategy or the dumbest marketing strategy. Because on the one hand, for those of us who have that collector's mentality, like, you have to get every single issue. You can't miss a week. And so you are shelling out that money every single week, and you are continuing to read those stories. On the other hand, for those who don't have that mentality, or who, really don't have the budget to be buying a Superman comic every week, maybe you've just been reading, like I said, Action Comics for years and years, and you just want to read Action Comics. And now this is really preventing you from being able to do that effectively. I mean, we sort of learned that lesson by trying to read this era, but because the app really had huge gaps in their Action Comics runs. Everything else was pretty much there, but Action Comics in particular, you go 5-6 issues in a row that just weren't there, and then you pick up with the story, and at one point, I'm gonna spoil, like, Lex Luthor died. I missed it. I don't know when he died. I didn't see it. It must have been in one of those issues that we missed. So, I mean, that's a barrier to entry for some readers. You miss a week, or your shop is out of it that week, and suddenly, out of luck.
That is a very good point. And, it's funny. I said to myself coming in, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to do a rant about the app. But, it's like, so the app was complete with respect to Superman, Adventures, and Man of Steel for this reading assignment. But to your point, they were missing big chunks of Action Comics. I bought them on eBay. When we initially mapped this out, I said to myself, well, all right, if there's something that's not on the app, I'll just skip it. And then as I got closer to it, I was like, all right, if I'm really going to do this, like, I'm just going to do it. And so, I tracked down the issues that weren't on the app. But it is just very frustrating. I've now taken to politely tweeting at DC Universe and saying, what's the plan here? And the thing that I didn't get a response, but this is looking way ahead, but Adventures of Superman on the app stops at issue 598. There are 4 issues after 598. 4 issues, that's it, that are like part of crossovers. They're on the app. Mm-hmm. But other than that, from 599 through 649, it's almost completely MIA. And that's the Joe Casey run, and that's the Greg Rucka run.
Yeah, I remember that.
Issues that I previously owned and sold, and now I'm like, oh, that would be great to talk about on the podcast. And this is a tangent, but you know what? I was really close to buying those runs on eBay. And I said, no. it irks me that like they should be on the app, and that was what I tweeted at them to ask, and like I said, I didn't get a response. But the thing that's disheartening, it's frustrating that there's so much stuff missing, but what's disheartening is that, like, I don't know if you follow this, but like Newsarama will regularly have articles about like, here's what's coming to the DC app this month, and yeah, they might add an issue. Like well, by the time people hear this, it likely will have happened. They added Action Comics. Oh God, what was it? 500 or 600? No, 600. The Burn during Burn.
Right. Okay.
This random issue of that, like not a random issue, like this milestone anniversary edition that was missing. They're adding that. That's one issue, and that's the disheartening part. It's like when they do add things, it's an issue at a time. Mm-hmm. I don't foresee any scenario where in the life cycle of this podcast series, all the Joe Casey and Greg Rucka issues will be there. Again, it's just as a Superman fan trying to do a podcast on it's really annoying. So anyway.
And it's arbitrary too. Like, sometimes you understand if you're like, well, this issue had a licensing issue because a certain character appeared who they don't have the rights to anymore. And okay, all right, they're not going to put that one in there. But there's really no rhyme or reason to why these particular issues were missing. And I didn't, unfortunately, order them on eBay. I just sort of skipped them and picked up with the next installment. Thank goodness for those triangles, because they really helped me keep it in line.
Yes, yeah, and that's perfectly fine. I know I had said that to you ahead of time. I'm like, there's something you don't get to, don't worry about it. So it's fine. But for myself, I'm glad I tracked them down, and so I really got the full picture. So, when we're talking about this, this period, I mean, the things that for this run in particular that we're talking about today, the things that really, I think, marked this reading assignment were the very rapid development of the relationship between Lois and Clark, including their engagement and his revealing his secret identity to her, as well as you had mentioned just a moment ago, the quote-unquote death of Lex Luthor, and the return of the Eradicator in physical form now as an actual person. And of course, this will set the stage for Reign of the Supermen down the line. But those were some of the the big pieces of this. You and I, we messaged a few days ago because a few days ago I still had a big chunk of reading left to do. But I messaged you and I was like, I'm enjoying this overall, but I don't feel like it's reaching the heights of what we talked about in the previous episode. And now that I've gotten to the end of it, I still stand by that statement. I enjoyed this leg of the reading assignment overall, but yeah, it didn't quite hit those highs that the last one did. With some exceptions, there were some real standout stories and some really interesting stuff, and there's plenty of stuff to talk about. But yeah, I didn't feel like it was necessarily as strong as what we talked about last time. And again, I know the answer from our Facebook messaging, but for our audience, where do you land on this?
Yeah, I pretty much agree completely. It felt when you messaged me, it felt like you had gotten an advanced copy of my notes because that's pretty much what I had said. And since then, I've been trying to figure out why it felt that way, because that now is a more important question to me than what did I think. And I'm trying to figure out if it's just because the quality actually did wane a bit, or whether maybe it was just sort of my own fatigue at reading 50 plus for the previous and then another 50 plus for this. I enjoyed it. I don't say fatigue as like I'm sick and tired of it. I genuinely enjoyed it. I looked forward to sitting down and reading it, but I wonder if when you've read now 100 issues from the same essentially creative team, I say that as the creators on all the books, does it start to lose some of the novelty? Because in the beginning, it was the beginning, right? It was John Byrne was off the titles, and we've got these new creators, and they're doing exciting new things. And by this point, they've been doing them for a while. So I haven't quite landed on why I think this is, but that's what was going through my mind.
I mean, I think you were asking yourself exactly the right question. I was thinking the same thing too, because I was like, yeah, well, I mean, what? because again, I knew we were going to talk about it. So it's like, what? How do I address this? Because it's like, what? I wish I could say there was something really concrete I could point to say like, well, this is why I didn't like it. I mean, there were with the Lois and Clark stuff. I have big issues, which I want to talk about in a second. But I think for me, maybe it just kind of paled in comparison to what we talked about last time. I mean, I really think that the Exile storyline and Day of the Krypton Man, they were so strong because they were stories about, Clark having these internal struggles, with his guilt over what he did to the Kryptonian criminals in Exile. And then in Day of the Krypton Man, struggling with this other side of himself. And I think that's why Mark of the Krypton Man was my favorite storyline from this batch of reading, because it kind of tapped into those same themes. So I think, so I guess that's kind of what it comes down to. I think those stories where there really is that internal tension, they're just vastly more compelling. And I don't think we got all that much of that in this batch. Again, still plenty of good stuff, but I just don't think it was as compelling for those. I mean, I think for me, that's ultimately kind of what I that's kind of where I landed on that.
Yeah, one of my notes is that I was much more invested in the emotional through lines than I was in some of the physical confrontations. And in the first third of our reading, I felt that the focus was very squarely on those emotional conflicts, while at the same time sort of mirroring them in the physical. In this in this leg, I felt that many of the physical battles were just that. They never really got beyond. There's this new, bad guy, new group of bad guys, new threats, but they never seemed to impact Clark on that emotional level, or at least that same emotional level. They didn't tie into the emotional conflicts, and so I felt I was at a distance a little bit from it.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, yeah, I mean, I really think that was kind of it, and that was kind of what was going on here. I mentioned before about the Lois and Clark relationship. It was hilarious to me because in the last episode, I said to you, I was like, because by the time we were done with our reading assignment for the last episode, there was nothing going on with Lois and Clark. They didn't even have a ton of interaction, and she was mostly just mad at him. I mean, there was really not much going on. And I remember saying to you, I was like, by the time we get to Death of Superman, when I started, I mean, they're engaged, they're madly in love. She knows his secret, and you very rationally were like, well, listen, we still have 100 issues to go here over these next 2 episodes, so it'll play. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like it'll play out over these 100 episodes. I mean, they go so fast. I got whiplash reading it. I mean, the beginning part was really nice, like where they have their date and when they kiss and all of that. And it's like, okay, like we're moving along here. But then I just felt like we got to a proposal so quickly. And I wanted to ask you something because, man, I had thoughts on the proposal. If you don't mind me asking, you're a married man, you're a family man. At some point, I'm assuming you proposed.
I did.
I'm curious how you did it. And more specifically, did you do it the way Clark did? Because, man, well, I don't want to pass judgment until I know how you did it. Well, how did you approach that?
Well, all right. So I will say, admittedly, mine was also abrupt because it happened 4 days after September 11th.
Oh,
And it was very much predicated on September 11th. Just the idea of people having lost loved ones suddenly, unexpectedly. And it hit me really, really hard. And although I was still planning a proposal at some point down the line, I got to that point on September 11th where I said, what am I waiting for? This is silly. Who knows what could happen in the next day, week, month. So I did it on September 16th, 2001. So it did feel in some ways very quick, but I felt like there was a reason. Whereas with Clark and Lois, I really hated being wrong about this because I did offer you that that solution, right? That there's a lot of time for this to develop, and then they just really didn't develop it, and there was no reason not to. That's the ultimate thing. Like there was no reason for. I mean, him asking her out for the first time. Okay, that fair enough. They've been working together for years. they've been covering stories together. They've been through a lot of stuff together. So I get that, there might be this interest. Um, the courting and dating phase offers up some really great opportunities for emotional conflict, because there were a couple of issues where, they were together, whether in someone's apartment or at a restaurant, and there's a crisis and he has to leave. I mean, there's one in particular I remember. He abandons her in a restaurant, and everybody's looking over like, that poor girl who got stood up.
Yeah.
What a jerk to do this to her. And of course, the comedy is they don't realize that it's Superman. Neither does she. So it's that kind of stuff that's really fun. It's really fun. And I can almost understand a buildup of that leading to him deciding, you know what, if I'm going to be really fair to her, and if I want this to work, then I have to reveal my identity, which he doesn't eventually come to. But even that is, there's no build up, and then the decision occurs and he removes the glasses. And yeah, I'm with you. I just felt like I wanted so much more potential there.
Yes. And now, before I pile on and share the things that bugged me, I'm gonna yeah, you're usually the very diplomatic one, and so I'm going to take a page out of your book, and I'm going to say, because like, credit where credit's due, because I was really thinking about this. As much as there was a lot about this that was lacking, honestly, I agree with everything you said, and I have a few things to add. But, in the 50 years pre-Krisis, and in the first couple of years post-Krisis, there was really no meaningful development in a relationship, a true relationship between Lois and Clark. In other media, obviously, Superman the movie and Superman 2, they finally, started to explore that territory, especially in Superman 2. But even Superman the movie, I mean, it showed you a romantic side of the character that had never really been accessed in a meaningful way in the comics. So, that had happened, but I think really, with that exception, you never really got all that much on the romance front, like a true exploration of it. So the fact that these writers went there, like, they actually put these two characters in a relationship, and they got them engaged, and they revealed the identity, and they didn't undo it. Again, credit where credit's due. I appreciate, on paper, I guess, the broad strokes of that. The execution was lacking in a lot of areas, but it's like they at least pushed forward in a way that we hadn't. So I will say that. The other thing, I want to say, and I mentioned this a couple episodes ago when Jeremy and I were talking about the Ruby Spears Superman cartoon, but I think I don't know, I think Superman fans owe a larger debt to Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, than we often think we do. And I've been thinking about that show a lot recently, because it finally just hit HBO Max, and they digitally remastered it, and it looks gorgeous. And of course, this happened literally days after I ordered the entire series on DVD, but whatever.
Of course.
But so they're finally on HBO Max. So I've been thinking about the show a little bit more, and here and there I've been watching clips and stuff like that. And, it's not part of this batch of episodes. It started right after the reign and return of Superman. So that's where I kind of cut it off, but we'll talk about it on the podcast down the line. But, for all of that shows, for all of the limitations and the campiness and Dean Cain's current political leanings, we'll put all that aside. Sure. They really mind the romance. And the thing that I was thinking about is, when you look at stories following Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, I mean, 10 years of Smallville, the two core relationships on that show were the doomed friendship between Clark and Lex, and the doomed relationship between Clark and Lana. We currently have the Superman and Lois TV show. I mean, Lois is right up there, and, she's one of the title characters. And, that's a show built around their relationship and their family, which is an outgrowth of the romance. And so, again, all of these things build off of each other. I mean, would we have had Lois and Clark absent what they had done in the comics in the years prior? Probably, to be honest. From what I kind of know of the background of that, I think so, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. But I don't know, would we have gotten everything that we've gotten since then without the, kind of the path that Lois and Clark paved? I don't know, but I've been thinking that it's like, I don't know. I feel like we owe a larger debt to that show than we often acknowledge.
No, you're probably right. And the fact that show came about on the heels of the comics that we're really talking about, right? The
Yeah.
buildup that begins here, that extends into the next batch that we're going to read, and then very much into the death and rebirth of Superman, paved the way for that show. And I think, look, I mean, the lessons we were learning were that, there's more to these characters. There are other ways you can tell stories other than a straight up action adventure series. Um, and again, there always has to be that element. I mean, Superman is at his core an action adventure hero. But for me, what's always made for great stories, period, forget in what medium and in what genre, is character and relationships. And to get to explore those in ways that they hadn't really gotten to. I mean, Clark and Superman had other romantic entanglements, nothing really to speak of. I mean, Lana, the love of his life from his younger years, by the time we, the reader, sort of catch up with an adult Superman, that's over and done with. So you get it in flashback and you get it in memories, but we don't often get to see the development of that relationship outside a series like a Smallville. So for them to get to do that with Clark and Lois was such a great idea. But again, I think that's what makes it a little bit extra disappointing, is that the potential was there and it didn't quite meet it.
Now, I'll play devil's advocate for a second, because I was thinking about this. It's like, I mean, I wonder from their perspective, whether the writers themselves and or editorial, if the thinking was, we've already had 50 years or more at that point, right, where nothing happened. So it's like, now we have the opportunity, we have the green light, like, let's just go, go, go. Maybe that was some of the thinking. But at the same time, it's like, yes, in terms of the publishing history of the character, you have all these years. But in the context of the story you're telling, it hasn't been that long, and we're really going pretty fast here. So the speed at which things unfolded was disappointing, because I really thought like we're really going to get to see this unfold, and it happened very fast. I found the actual proposal to be so disappointing. I mean, it happens in Superman 50 in the Krisis of the Crimson Kryptonite storyline, where Superman has been rendered powerless by red kryptonite supplied to Lex Luthor by Mxyzptlk. And Clark, like, he had gone to visit his parents a few issues earlier, and he never unpacked his suitcase, and he finally unpacks and he finds a ring. And he's talking to Ma on the phone, and she's like, "Well, I see the way you look at Lois. I wanted you to have this." He's like, "Yeah, I really do like her." He's like, "I should hope you like her." Jesus. And so then, Lois is dealing with, her mother's in the hospital, and, she's upset. And so they're at the planet, and Clark takes her down to Dooley's, like the bar rest, bar and grill, like at the basement of the Daily Planet, the ground level. And they're sitting there in the middle of the restaurant, and he just like takes out the ring, and he's like, "Oh, my mom gave me this. And, I've really been thinking, do you want to be my wife?" It was so disappointing that wasn't a more significant moment, and that it wasn't depicted in a more romantic and meaningful way. I mean, it was really disappointing. And her reaction, she was just like, "Oh, that's sweet, Clark. I really got to think about it." He's like, "Sure, no problem." It was, I don't know. I was so disappointed by that.
Yeah, it read to me the way like an alien species would write it if they were basing it on like really bad soap operas that they had seen, like their approximation of what the way human beings interact rather than actual human beings.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. I'm really glad you said that, because that lines up. We use different analogies, but our thinking lines up 100%, because between that scene and other conversations that the characters have, Lois and Clark, I was thinking about Alien. That is that works perfectly. But I was thinking to myself, it's like their dialogue reads to me as if a kid were writing what he thought adults sounded like.
Yeah.
And, these stories were written by grown men. I don't maybe the men part is accounts for this, but it's just like, it just didn't. And that's why I am appreciative of, and I gotta, I think we got to give the edge to the Loeb Kelly, the Joe Kelly stuff in particular of the early 2000s. I think there you got a more realistic married couple, the way they interacted with each other. Here, you don't get that. And, there's a lot in the Silver Age, for example, that you can, like, a lot of corniness or awkwardness, that stiltedness, you can chalk up to, well, they were writing for kids. I mean, here, I don't know that you can really give them that pass on it. And I just feel like it didn't, the dialogue in particular. And when you're dealing with a relationship, it's like, that's gotta be there. And it wasn't. And that was one of the big things the big issues that I had with the relationship.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Silver Age, because we can look back at older comics and give it a pass, because there were certain styles and there were certain mores of the time that stories were told very quickly. You had to cram a lot into every panel of every page. Here, what we've already talked about and explored is, because they had 3 books to work with, eventually 4, they could take their time a little bit. It's not like they hadn't already developed certain plot lines, certain character arcs over, in some cases, years. So they were already doing these things. It just seemed like the odd choice to not do it for that particular relationship, because it needed it the most.
Man, I'm so glad that is such a good point. You're right. There are so many instances where, whether it's Jerry, Perry and Alice's son, or any number of things, Cat Grant and Gangbuster himself. Like, there's so much stuff that plays that plays out over a significant period of time, where they, maybe they could have picked up the pace, but it's like, here, if there was ever a place to, like, slow it down, it was here. I'm totally on board with you. The other thing too that really irked me, and this just, look, we, as Superman fans, I think we all have, we all look at the character in certain ways. I think there's a lot we if you polled 100 Superman fans, there's a lot that we agree on. But then I think there's certain aspects of the character that maybe you lean into a little bit more, or whatever. It just didn't sit right with me that he would propose before revealing his secret. And, right. He makes a point of saying, well, before we marry, I should tell her who I am. It's like, yeah, you think? But I felt that they're, like, again, I'll play devil's advocate. On the one hand, I understand from Clark's perspective, he wants to make sure Lois is choosing Clark and not Superman. Although the way I don't know. I feel like the way it played out in the comics, it's like, it's not like she was really swooning and pining over Superman in the stories we read. And it's like, if you really think that that's what Lois is like, if you think that little of her, it's like, why are you even with her in the first place? So I don't know that really totally tracks, but fair enough, right? Like, before he commits to her, he wants to know that she is in it for Clark. But I felt that, maybe after an I love you, that might have been a point where he's like, okay, I know she really likes Clark, which I missed it. Not missed it, but maybe I'm forgetting. I don't feel like there was a moment where they exchanged I love yous.
No.
Okay. Yeah. That's the thing. I was like, I don't remember that being a thing, but in any event, so, the fact that he waits until after they're engaged to reveal his identity, that really didn't sit right with me. And then I want to get your take on the actual reveal, more so from Lois's perspective, because, like, from Clark's perspective, it's like, look, he rips open the shirt, he takes off the glasses. It's like, that is what it is. Mm-hmm. I felt that she took it too well. Like I don't know what your take was. I didn't feel like she asked the questions that you would expect her to.
Yeah. So, especially as an investigative reporter,
right?
She's got to have a ton of questions. Maybe not right away, but certainly, like, and this is a place where having, multiple issues a month could really benefit them. Like, let her have her initial reaction. Maybe she overreacts, which I could understand. This is huge news. I mean, she does have that moment where she goes, well, now I don't feel so crazy for, all those times where I'm wondering, like, where did Clark disappear to every time there's a crisis? Like, okay, at least that explains that. But yeah, to let her, sit with it and process it, and then come back, like, to ask him the questions that someone who is now emotionally and romantically linked to him would have. I mean, what does this mean? What are the implications for their relationship? What are his expectations of her in this relationship? What can her expectations reasonably be of him? Instead, she's just sort of figuring those out on her own. She has moments after she knows where, there's a crisis, and she looks over at him and goes, "Yep, I know, you gotta go." And she's supportive. And there are other moments where he flies off, and she's sort of left thinking like, "Yep, here I am alone again, and this is I better get used to this." you know, um, and so I don't think she was really given the opportunity to process it, and that's why, like, from the beginning of the relationship all the way to the reveal, as they really start getting, I mean, they really don't start planning anything in terms of the marriage, but building toward that, the whole thing just doesn't feel right. I wouldn't want to be either one of them in that relationship.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, I'll play devil's advocate once again. I mean, I wonder if, I guess it's easy for us to look at these stories. We know how important the Lois and Clark relationship becomes.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say, like, well, why didn't you give more time and more, panel space for this? Like, this is huge. But I don't know. I mean, and again, that's not something I can answer. Like, internally, how big of a thing was this to them? I don't know, because if you look at it like any of the other subplots, although I agree with you, a lot of the other subplots did have more room to breathe, I feel. But I don't know. If you look at it as just another subplot, it's like, okay, like, it's a little quick, but it's in line with the others for the most part. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know. That's kind of the only thing I can sort of offer up as a potential defense.
Yeah, when I think about the fact that at least it felt like the Whites and the Kents going on a cruise together got about as much attention and play as the Clark and Lois relationship. That, to me, I don't think it's an unfair criticism to say you might have wanted to put the romance a little bit more front and center.
Yeah. Now, I will say this, though. Dan Jurgens gave us an issue that I really enjoyed of Superman towards the end of our reading assignment here. I think it might have been even the last issue or one of the last issues where they have their long talk in the mountains.
Yeah.
And, where they really have this discussion. There's a lot of it that we don't actually hear. Which I was kind of like, God, it's like, really? But a part of it that we do get, the overall, the gist of it is, they're talking about, I mean, how they're going to fit into each other's lives, but more specifically how Lois fits into, the Superman's life. But it was a really strong moment, I thought, where Lois asks him basically, why are you Superman? And, he kind of dances around it at first, and he talks about why he decided to become a journalist. He's like, it would be unfair if I were a police officer or a fireman, but as a journalist, I can compete on an even field. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But then she presses him, and that was like, this was a great scene. I really like this issue. I wish we had more of this. But she says, okay, but you didn't answer my question. Why are you Superman? And he says, and it's just, the panel is just him, just a close-up on his face, and he says, because no one else can. It's like he has these abilities, and he has to use them, and it's not something that anyone else can do. It's not a burden that anyone else can carry for him. And I thought that was great. I love that. Again, I just wish there was more of it, but that was a really, really standout issue and scene in particular, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a huge heel turn here, going from, some of our criticisms to, no, but even just hearing you repeat that line, I literally got a tear in my eye, because every now and again, a writer manages to take a character you think who you've followed for, years. Of course, as comic book readers, we have a lot of those characters, and they're able to distill the essence of that character down into a single line, right? I mean, to draw a comparison, when in the first Avengers film, when Tony Stark tells Bruce Banner it's time to get angry, and he just looks back and he said, "That's my secret. I'm always angry." You That's when you knew they understood who the Hulk was. And the line that you just gave us from Superman, I think it is Superman 59, that is who Superman is, right? He does this because nobody else can. It is his responsibility to do the good that only a Superman can, you know? It's not Batman's motivation, and it's not Wonder Woman's motivation. It is a uniquely Superman motive for being heroic, and it's one of the things I think that keeps him so pure and so good, and always keeps him on the right path. So that issue absolutely blew me away, and I believe that's also the issue that ends with almost like an entire issue of the Daily Planet. I mean, you get the newspaper itself, right?
Yes, yeah.
and
That's the one, I think.
and the cornerstone of it is the article that Lois writes, obviously not as Superman's fiance, but she pretends at a little bit more of an objective point of view. She even assumes, maybe Superman has a love interest. We all like to think that he might be dating Wonder Woman, but of course he's not. And it was the last paragraph of that article that, in conjunction with that line that you just gave us, absolutely floored me. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to, because I reproduced it in my notes. It's that powerful, and I think the listeners ought to hear it.
Yeah,
She
please.
writes, "Whatever Superman's other life, we owe him far more than we can ever repay. All we can do is thank him each and every time and try to be a bit more understanding. Maybe we should act less like ungrateful children who expect his constant protection and more like adults. Just once, we could ask him what we can do for him. After all, he deserves it." I'm tearing up now. It's
Yeah.
beautiful and it's brilliant.
No, it really is. I mean, that was a standout issue, and for anyone, if you ever read it, it probably stands out, for what we're talking about, but also just the covers, the two of them on the mountain, and it's, again, most of the covers that we see are action packed, but this was one that really told you, like, this was an important moment in their relationship. And I love what you read, and it is so resonant and powerful. And the line that I shared where she asks him why he's Superman. It's like, yeah, that's, and this we've come at this so many times on this podcast series, but it's like, why is the character so unique? And it is because he's not, for me at least, as this Superman fan, it's like he's not driven by guilt or revenge. It's like he chooses to use his powers in this way because no one else can, because he has this gift. And it's like if you have a gift, if you have something you can do that no one else can do, it's like, don't you have that responsibility to share it with the world? And so this issue I think really gets added. And there are, because again, as much as a lot of the relationship stuff let me down, there were a number of instances where Clark was beating himself up over not being able to do enough, and Lois was the one to be like, look, you're not a god. You can't be everywhere. You can't do everything. And I like that. Again, I think that while there were some stumbling blocks here and some flaws in the execution, I think that, we were getting some of the pieces here, that would be developed more fully in subsequent stories and subsequent adaptations. So, we're not quite there yet, but we're on our way. I think, like, the ingredients are there.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, we talked last time about, you know, what a pleasure it was to see the origins of the Eradicator, which, you and I experienced first with the rebirth of Superman, because the Eradicator was one of the four identities vying for sort of the, dominance to be the new Superman. Um, and I enjoyed almost as much. I mean, it wasn't as big a deal here, but we got to meet Hank Henshaw in this series of issues. In fact, it was the first issue, I believe, that we read for this, was this sort of, for keen-eyed readers, it very much mirrored the origin of the Fantastic Four, but gone really awry. This quartet of adventurers off in space, bombarded by certain radiations, and rather than giving them, fantastic powers and them banding together to be heroes, I mean, they just mutate into just monsters, all of them monsters, right? The Thing, but worse. And most of them end up dying as a result of their exposure to this. They can't even keep themselves together. So it was cool to see the evolution or the introduction of another version of the Superman, because he will go on to become the cyborg Superman. Spoiler. Later on, so it was those kinds of things that are still really, really fun here. I'll say, I enjoyed.
Yeah, I'm with you totally. Actually, I want to circle back to the Hank Henshaw stuff. Let's take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about that, and we'll dive into what's going on in the rest of the supporting cast, and we'll hit on the other the big storyline. So we'll be all right. Shadadigans is a weekly podcast by dads sharing their fairly new dad experiences and also just talking about whatever. Listen, relate, and laugh. I was a guest on episode 90, and it was a blast. One of the hosts is a multiple guest of this show, Justin DeVoe. To follow Justin's fitness and cosplay journey, follow him on Instagram at RealLifeLobo. And if you're interested in starting or continuing your own fitness journey, check out Iron and Honor on Instagram. The Hive Comics and Games is an oasis of nerd fun and events in the heart of Odessa, Texas. Whether it's comic book superhero stories or role-playing in a dungeon, the Hive is where to be. Come tap your mana and face off against the top Magic the Gathering players in West Texas. Hive carries a majority of new comic titles each Wednesday and has all of your favorite titles in their back issue section. Follow them on Facebook at The Hive Comics and on Instagram at The Hive Comic Shop. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. If you enjoy this show, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. I also hope you'll consider joining my Patreon community. The support of my patrons enables me to produce this podcast, and patrons get rewards too, including exclusive episodes, advanced listens, and more. Sign up today and get instant access to the back catalog. Visit patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all of my patrons. I truly appreciate your support. All right, and we're back. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I really did enjoy about this leg of the reading project, especially the beginning part, was seeing the origins of Hank Henshaw. I mean, we got a glimpse of him in one of the final issues that we read for the last episode. But for this, we really got to see exactly what you described, like this horror riff on the Fantastic Four. And, for Henshaw, like, he ends up, his consciousness survives and he's able to create, new bodies for himself using machinery. And, of course, that will play into his evolution as the cyborg Superman. And I remember, as a kid reading Reign of the Superman and when we finally find out who cyborg Superman is, and, they reference these couple of issues that we read here, but to actually read them, it was really interesting. Again, like, that's been one of the things that's been so cool about doing these episodes, is getting the context for, aspects of my journey as a Superman fan that I've kind of always had, or, maybe taken for granted. And it's like, now I get to see, oh, this is where it actually, came to be. So yeah, that was pretty cool. I liked that a lot. And what I really liked was, I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit to Mark of the Krypton Man, but it's interesting to me the parallels between Cyborg Superman and Eradicator, because with Cyborg Superman, Hank Henshaw, you have this character whose consciousness can't be destroyed, and he'll continue to take various forms over the years, even following Reign of the Supermen, and when he exits the story here in the couple of issues that we read at the beginning of this reading assignment, he finds Superman's birthing matrix out in space, right? Superman had cast it out there in Superman #1 by John Byrne, and kind of just like left it floating out there. And so Henshaw's consciousness, comes into contact with that, and that will ultimately enable him to become Cyborg Superman down the line. But so you have the consciousness that can't be destroyed, plus Kryptonian technology. Then with the Eradicator, and again, we'll get into this more, we can talk more about the mark of the Krypton Man, but, there you have energy that can't be destroyed, plus Kryptonian technology. So the parallels between the two are interesting. And yeah, it was really cool to finally see the origin of Hank Henshaw.
Yeah, no, for sure. I enjoyed that as my transition into this new section. And then the flip side to that, whereas that was something new that set up something that's coming, the rest of the sort of Dark Knight over Metropolis storyline, which I happen to have in trade, was sort of the end, the conclusion to a story that had been set up in the months prior, where this woman, Amanda McCoy, who had hired a private eye because she had figured out that Clark Kent was Superman and tried telling Lex Luthor, who didn't believe her and all that, she sets up this sort of game of gotcha where she asks Clark to meet her in a cemetery and then springs some kryptonite on him. Of course, it adversely affects him, and she knows that he is Superman. And so, what might have been a really interesting thorn in Clark's side for a while turns out to sort of fizzle immediately, as basically on her way home she's abducted and murdered, and then Superman and Batman have to team up to solve the murder, which at that point they just think is just a missing persons case. They don't realize, Clark doesn't realize the connection until the end. So we get the conclusion of that in that story, which also allowed for this opportunity for a Superman Batman team up. And the implication was that in this post-crisis era, this was really one of the first times that the two of them were getting together. They didn't particularly like each other. They didn't, use the same methods to solve crimes. They were sort of getting in each other's way in so many ways. So it was a fun way to kind of cap off what had been our previous reading without having to set up, so much of what was to come.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I really enjoyed the beginning part of this reading assignment, and I Dark Knight over Metropolis I thought was really strong. Dan Greenfield and I, we touched upon this a little bit in part 1 of this event when we talked about, we were talking about John Byrne's Superman run, but we briefly touched on what he did with Superman and Batman in Man of Steel, the miniseries. And, that was their first post-crisis meeting, and it dealt with the villain Magpie. I mean, it left something to be desired. And I thought that this storyline, Dark Knight over Metropolis, made up for it. I felt like it offered some redemption to the Batman-Superman relationship, and the fact that they were teaming up over this this mystery. And I agree with you. It was cool to see the Amanda McCoy storyline both pay off and wrap up. You can only go so far with it, but that was kind of out there dangling, right? Like this former LexCorp employee who knew that, or heavily suspected that Clark was Superman and was trying to prove it. And, like you said, like she gets the drop on him with using the, Lex's kryptonite ring. And so it was nice to see, some resolution to that, but then also to segue into this, Batman, Superman team up as they're trying to solve the mystery and piecing it all together and figuring out who Amanda McCoy was and what she was up to. So I really felt like that offered some redemption to that Magpie storyline. And, I remember reading comics later in the 90s where they addressed the fact that Superman had entrusted Batman with this kryptonite ring in case Superman ever went rogue. And look, in the last episode, he had a psychotic break and he was going around knocking heads as gangbusters. So it's like, yeah, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. So it makes sense that Superman would think about that. And so the fact that, that story ends with Superman in the Batcave entrusting Batman with the kryptonite ring, again, going back to this idea of context, like it was really cool to see that moment. and such a watershed moment in their relationship. And I really like, I think, we still have a long way to go, I think, before we get to the dynamic that we see, in Jeff Loeb's Superman Batman, where, like you said, like their methods are different, but there is a friendship there, and there's definitely mutual respect. Where the seeds for that are being planted. But I really, it was a great way to start this reading assignment, and I thought that was really strong. That was definitely a highlight of this for me.
In every best version of the DC universe, in my head, Batman has a kryptonite ring with Superman's permission, right? In every version, no matter how many times you reboot it, no matter how many times in every version that is the best version, that happens. The other thing that I liked about the end of that storyline is it sets up what I had sort of called this love quintangle, because we do get really, really minor seeds of a possible Clark Lois romantic relationship, but Jose Delgado, who is Gangbuster, has some feelings for Lois. But there's also something with Cat Grant, and Jimmy Olsen also has some feelings for Cat Grant. So there's this really sort of weird, hints of romance that are going on, and you don't know who's going to end up with whom at any given moment. And I actually really like that, because again, where I come from is amidst all the, the action and adventure, there has to be a core of character and relationships, and so to get those hints is really satisfying.
I think that's a perfect point here. Much as we did in the last episode, where we again sort of use the supporting cast as our jumping off point. Yeah, maybe we could. I don't want to call it a lightning round, but we have already been going for an hour, so maybe we can kind of go through like what's going on with the supporting cast during this period of time. We haven't mentioned him yet, but I'm gonna lead off with this because I don't want to forget. Bibbo Babowski wins the lottery and buys the Ace of Clubs. And I love that. I thought that was great. He doesn't get a ton of play in these issues. That's really his big claim to fame, but it's not a small one. And it was the ticket that had originally been purchased by Jose. I want to talk about this idea of bad luck because that sums up Jimmy Olsen in this run of issues. But the Bibbo thing was a cool, funny bit that I don't think I was ever aware of.
No, I was never aware of that either. At first, I found it amusing that the ticket had fallen out of Delgado's pocket. He was helping somebody on the street who had gotten injured, and the ticket fell out. And Bibbo found it, and of course, and he ended up winning $14 million. And then there's a moment a little later where Delgado finds out about it, and he knows that was his ticket,
right?
But he doesn't do anything about it. Nothing. He doesn't follow it. He's just like, I guess my luck. I lost the girl. I lost the ticket. And he's with Kat at that point, and he's becoming close to her son. And, there is the relationship developing and things aren't so terrible, but he's having trouble finding steady work. And, this really would have helped him, but he doesn't follow up.
I know, that was really funny. Jose doesn't get it. He doesn't, again, I guess all of these, there's an ebb and flow to all of this. So a few of these characters, they don't have as much play in these issues necessarily that maybe they did before. I think Jose kind of falls into that category. Mm-hmm. He is embarking on this relationship with Kat. He's abducted by a gang whose leader has been paralyzed, and he knows that Jose had previously been paralyzed and is now out and about walking. So, he's trying to figure out how that happened and trying to force Jose to work the same miracle on him. And, Jose is with Adam Grant when he's abducted, and then Adam's missing. They ultimately find him in the Ace of Clubs.
Right.
So, not a ton going on with Jose, but we do have that. Cat Grant, similarly, it's funny to me. I was surprised at how much play she got in the beginning part, specifically in Adventures of Superman post-Krisis, like the Marv Wolfman stuff. Like, she got a lot of play there. She takes a bit more of a backseat here. She has her moment where she finds out Lois and Clark are engaged. And, again, I said this in part 2, I think, of this event here, but I was kind of there for the Clark and Kat little bit of relationship that they were, kind of exploring a little bit in the beginning. And then obviously that didn't go anywhere, but, we get her reaction, to that. And then Vincent Edge, father of Morgan Edge, basically, propositions her at a certain point. And, she has that internal dilemma where she's like, I don't want to go down the path I've gone down before, but then she ultimately does agree to spend time with him. So I know this is going to continue to play out, down the line a little bit, but, I made note of that, when we got there.
Yeah, I don't mind when characters who had been in the spotlight take the back seat. But given how many of the issues that we read focused on none of them, it seemed like, I don't want to, is it too far to call it a misstep? Or, I'm looking back at my notes and I'm seeing like there's a whole issue that's just sort of, it takes place on like a Native American reservation, and it's just sort of full of really outdated stereotypes and all that, and really not a lot of attention given to the supporting cast. And they do this sort of weird Old West adventure with Jade and Obsidian. Then there's the Sinbad contract, which focuses on like a Muslim family who get their hands on a belt that gives them superpowers they stole from Lex Luthor. There's the Mr. Z stuff. There's the Terra Man. There's all this sort of new stuff, and I get the need to sort of inject new ideas because you never know which ones are going to hit and which ones aren't. But to do it at the expense of a Cat Grant who had been given so much attention and who was developing into a really interesting character, to do it at the expense of Jose Delgado, to take Jimmy Olsen, who was a huge part of the previous reading assignment we had, and then other than a few key moments here and there, again, took a back seat. To me, that was one of the reasons why I wasn't as enamored of these issues as I was of the previous batch.
Yeah, and I think, I think the problem you run into then when, these characters do take a back seat like that is I feel like they get reduced to one note.
Yeah.
And so with Kat, it's like, look, even in the prior Cat Grant stories, the idea is like she's loose. She's loose, like she
Right.
slept her way to the top. They do, I don't know if they circle back to potential alcoholism issues, certainly not in the issues that we read, but earlier on, there was something where she was like always hitting the sauce. So I feel like, again, like when you don't see the characters that much, like that's kind of all that they then become. With Jimmy Olsen, I mentioned bad luck before. So, Jimmy gets a fair amount of play, although, all the business that we saw in the previous episode, as far as this tension between Superman and Jimmy, that kind of gets,
it's resolved.
It's resolved. Yeah, I guess it's fair to say. Jimmy certainly has a part to play in the Soul Search, the 3-part storyline that, spoiler alert, results in the death of Jerry White. Where the demon Blaze has branched out into the nightclub industry and has converted a church into a nightclub,
You do.
Yeah, and is poisoning the youth of Metropolis and corrupting them. And Jerry White has gotten caught up in all of this, and Blaze ultimately tries to take the souls of Jimmy and Jerry. There's a bit of business where Intergang is involved, and they actually go to shoot Jerry, and Jimmy tries to save him, and they both catch bullets, and they both end up in the hospital. And as much as the doctors issue after issue after issue tell us that there shouldn't really be anything physically wrong with them, that the bullets didn't do any major damage, they're still in dire straits, and we know as the reader that their souls are in jeopardy here. This is a weird tangent, and if you don't get the reference, this might fall totally flat, but do you watch Always Sunny by any chance?
No, I don't.
Okay. I'll just say this real quick. For any Always Sunny fans out there, if you remember the Nightman Cometh musical episode, there's a bit where they talk about the boys' souls, and when you say that together really quickly, it sounds like something else, and the Always Sunny fans know what I'm talking about. As I was reading these issues, and Blaze kept talking about these boys' souls, all I could think about was that episode of Always Sunny. Scott, I don't know. Have you never watched it like at all? Always
I
Sunny?
haven't at all.
It
Now I want to.
It's so good. And I don't know. I forget which season it was. It might have been 5 or something like that. But they're going into season 15. Or I mean, it's been on forever.
Oh.
But the gang puts on this musical, and Danny DeVito's character Frank he's this troll, and he's singing this song about you got to pay the troll toll if you want the baby boy's soul. But he's singing it together really quickly, and again, it sounds like something else, and it's so funny. And that's all I could think of when I was reading those Soul Search issues. So I just want to mention this. I know I've addressed this previously. I don't love the supernatural, the intersections like Superman and Supernatural. It just doesn't do anything for me, like ever. I guess it's just a matter of preference, but so these issues where Superman, is in the netherworld and he's fighting Blaze on the supernatural plane and he's trying to save the boys' souls. It just, I don't know. It didn't do anything for me. I mean, that being said, I found the real world scenes of, Jerry and Perry and Alice, worrying about Jerry. I mean, those really tugged at the heartstrings. Those were really strong, but the action, portions of this kind of left me cold, ironically, since we were in hell. But I mean, what did you think about those issues?
No, I'm with you. Our tastes are aligned in that regard. I check out. I mean, I think we talked about it the last episode. If Etrigan is on the page, I'm out. Like because it signals to me that there's the supernatural. The issues with the time and time again storyline that took place in like Camelot. I was just out. It immediately takes me out. Superman is one of those characters who can function in a lot of different settings and function well. But to me, the supernatural is just one that it never works for me. And like you, I found myself really looking forward to those breaks where we go, oh, thank God we're back in the hospital, which is a weird thing to say. And I liked the resolution of that story because, not only does it give Perry and Alice White, an emotion to play, right? The grief over the loss of a child, and a child who really kind of went the wrong way. Like he really got into some bad stuff. He was a hooligan. But then it became even bigger than that when we learned that that Jerry White was actually a biological product of Alice White and Lex Luthor. And so that adds a whole new wrinkle to the relationship because now you have this couple who's grieving for their son, but Perry also is dealing with the fact that it never was his son to begin with. And he's does this self-recrimination where he thinks, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong as a father? What did I not give this kid and all that? And at the end of the day, it's not his kid. And, genetically, was he predisposed to villainy because he's Lex Luthor's kid? And, it took the two of them going away on a vacation and Perry leaving the planet for a while, not the physical planet, the Daily Planet for the listeners, to rekindle the relationship and to find peace with each other. And so I actually really did like the way that the Whites storyline unfolded over the course of these issues coming out of that. But yeah, when we were in those hell scenes, it just felt interminable to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think our tastes are aligned on that, and no, I mean, even though those parts were kind of rough to get through, I mean, I agree. I mean, I thought everything else with the Whites, really packed a punch, and you needed to have resolution to the Jerry White saga at some point, because it's years now at this point in the comics where this kid's on the wrong path, and there's this tension, and it's like something's got to give. Like either he goes full villain, or he turns a corner and gets on the straight and narrow, or sadly, as played out here, he meets this untimely end. It was interesting. It was a good payoff too, I guess, to John Byrne's World of Metropolis miniseries, which I don't know if have you ever read that?
I haven't.
So we talked about that many episodes ago when we did post-crisis origins, but
Yeah.
Perry White got a spotlight issue, and we find out in that story that when he was off as a foreign war correspondent, that Lex put the moves on Alice. So we had that backstory, and now we really got to see that play out. And your heart breaks for Perry twice over, and but the thing about it that was even more interesting to me was Lex's reaction to all of this, because and I know I've said this before, but the one of the things that just leaves me cold with post-crisis Lex, especially when you don't have that, like the backstory between Clark and Lex from Smallville that we would get on the TV show, where, I guess for me, I like some measure of redemption for the character, something. Otherwise, I feel like it's just not as interesting. And you don't get a ton of that post-crisis, but you do get something here where he does seem to feel something over the death of Jerry, and he ponders what Jerry's fate might have been, had Lex acknowledged him as his son. So, and so I thought that was interesting. And then just the confrontation between, Perry and Lex. And again, that's the funny thing about, post-crisis Lex, he's not Clark's contemporary, he's Perry's. And there are later stories, because I remember as a kid reading this stuff that I don't remember the specifics, but like they do get into more of the backstory between Lex and Perry. And so I thought that was pretty cool.
No, I agree. And the thing about Lex's reaction to Jerry's death that really struck me and added so much humanity to the character that I wish had been exploited a little bit more is, he does roll a tear when he learns that Jerry has died. And to me, and it coincides with Lex's own knowledge that he himself is dying. So to me, without really any text, it read as Jerry was my one shot at preserving my legacy of having this bit of immortality. And now that he's gone, when I'm gone, I'm really gone.
Yeah.
There's nothing I have to leave behind. I've got the, LexCorp and the holdings and all that stuff, but on a human level, I have nothing. I have no legacy. And that to me is a very human and profound uh, emotion to play that unfortunately he really didn't get to play for that long. But for the moment he did, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you totally. I want to continue on with Lex, but again, Jimmy had that role to play in this too. So I just want to talk about Jimmy for a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, in these issues that we're talking about here, he's somewhat tentatively dating Lucy. So they're kind of testing the waters a little bit. He's still living with his mother, who finally recovers from, everything she had been dealing with, finding out that her husband had lived past, the point that she had initially thought, all the stuff that was in the issues that we discussed previously. Jimmy ultimately gets his own apartment, immediately after which he's fired from the planet due to budget, cutbacks. And then like this just sets off this chain where it's like issue after issue. He's just like, he's working in the cafeteria at the News Time building, and then a fire breaks out and he loses that job. And, it's just so many instances where it seems like things might be breaking his way, and then they don't. I don't know that I have much commentary on it other than, it's, I don't know, just I guess a tough run for Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah, and then by the time we sort of last see him, he's selling hot dogs out of a cart in, I guess, Metropolis's equivalent of Central Park, and
Right.
it becomes a sort of almost slapstick uh, adventure when he's trying to hide the fact that he has sunk so low from, I think Clark and Lois are like walking down the street and he knows they're going to see him, and he sort of hides, and then a bunch of kids come out and steal all the hot dogs, and he knows he's going to get fired now. And it's this woe is me. And it works for a little while, I think, for the character. I don't know how well it works long term. What I did appreciate about it was we saw on a very human level, the toll that is taken when a corporation is forced to, lay people off. It goes from being just sort of statistics to, you see the real human element of it. And we watch as the Daily Planet as a whole evolves here. Perry is forced to take a leave of absence because he's grieving over his son and he needs time away. And so Foswell, I forget his first name.
Yeah, Sam
Dick?
Foswell.
Sam. Uh, Sam Foswell takes over, and he seems genial enough at first, and then he really starts taking a hard line on things, especially when the corporate powers that be sort of tell him that budget's tight and he's got to let people go, and he lets Jimmy go, and then at a certain point, the staff as a whole is really dissatisfied, and they end up going on strike, and they're picketing out in front of the Daily Planet building, and so I think without the Jimmy Olsen subplot, all of the other goings on would seem just sort of more like faceless set dressing. But Jimmy's the human element. I just wish it hadn't been played for such laughs, because I think there's an important message there about human beings as workers.
I suspect that was, I mean, yeah, I don't know. That might have been beyond what, I don't know, they thought an audience would want or could handle. I don't know. Yeah. But I mean, I agree with you, and I wish that it had been mined more for that than for laughs. I guess sadly I understand why they went the direction they did, but it's like, oh man, this is really interesting. But on that note, and circling back to Lex, one of the things that I had written down was, numerous issues get at this idea that following Lex's quote unquote death, Metropolis, the city, is really struggling because LexCorp was involved in everything on both sides of the law, and had, for better or worse, had maintained some degree of order. And now with LexCorp in this degree of turmoil, people are getting laid off, and there are these labor disputes and strikes and scabs, and Intergang is, fanning the flames of this as well, and instigating violence on the picket line to try to, further destabilize the situation. So just like in the last episode, we learned about hostile takeovers and poison pills and all that stuff.
Right.
There's really interesting stuff that's kind of, under the surface here a little bit. Again, it's the sort of thing, I always have to remind myself, as much as I would be perfectly happy to have full issues devoted to the Lois and Clark relationship and the inner workings of, big city, politics and infrastructure and labor. I think the best we could get, especially, in Superman comics in the early 90s, is these subplots. And it's I'm grateful that we at least got those, but I know it's you look at, and, you rattled off, a number of, some of the, the Native American story in Smallville, and, right, some of the stuff and you look at some of those stories, and they, to be honest, they were kind of a slog to get through. And it was when we would have those breaks and catch up with the supporting cast where it's oh, okay, now, it's getting a little interesting. And I wish those had been flipped. I understand why they weren't, but I really wish they had been.
Yeah. And there were subplots in some ways that they were letting us know that these are subplots. So I remember, for instance, during the Time and Time Again storyline, Superman is shunted across time. He's in World War II. He's in, Camelot and all this. And then in each of the issues, and I think there were 6 of them in that storyline, you'd get one panel in each issue. One panel each for Bibbo, for where is it? Jimmy and Lucy Lane, for Perry and Alice White, for Lois, and then for the LexCorp board of directors. You'd get one panel of them in a boardroom panicking because they don't know what to do, and they're waiting for a phone call, and what's going to be. And that to me was the first time I recognized just how strange the imbalance felt, especially coming off again the previous issues we had read for the last episode, where everything seemed very organically woven in, where everything felt for the most part, everything felt like it got the right amount of play at the right time. And here in that particular storyline I was getting the unintended message that, all right, we know this really doesn't matter, but we're going to catch you up with these people really, really quickly, and then we're just going to get back to the main plot. And I was less interested in the main plot than I was in what those folks were up to.
So I've given this a lot of thought. I'm of two minds of the specifically what you're referencing in the time and time again storyline, because it did, issue after issue, it did grow tedious.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's like, I get it. They were trying to show you that not much time was passing, right? Like, we were seeing all this time passing for Superman, but back in Metropolis, issue after issue, it's like a minute later, like, but the effect is that you get 6 or 7 issues in a row where the LexCorp board is like, well, we don't know what to do. And it's like, after a while, it does grow very tiresome. So, and yeah, I think to your point, I mean, I think it does run the risk of conveying to the reader, like, hey, this really isn't that important. Let's get back to Superman fighting dinosaurs. And on the note of time and time again, because that is one of the big storylines here. I mean, there are a couple of storylines. I mean, I guess Time and Time Again and Panic in the Sky, which we'll cover in the next episode, are two, I guess, the two best examples of that, of stories that I knew of. As a Superman reader, they would be referenced, or, as much as I never did that back issue hunt, I would be flipping through back issue bins and see, like part 2 of Time and Time Again. I wonder what that story was about. Yeah. So, like, there are a few stories where I was I was always curious. What can I say except I hope Panic in the Sky is a lot better. I mean, the basic premise of this is like Superman bouncing through time for 7 issues. The basic setup is the linear man comes to present day Metropolis to try to retrieve the time traveling Booster Gold, right? Who's likely wreaking havoc on the timeline by being in a different time. Makes sense. Superman intervenes. He messes with the time travel gauntlet. He ends up getting, caught in the time stream. And he has enough, I guess, like temporal energy between that and whenever there's an explosion, he's like hurtled to a different time. And so across the storyline, he bounces back and forth between, the 30th century with the Legion of Superheroes and then and the past, including, initially he's like, in World War II era, he joins the circus for a while. He's involved in World War II. Then he goes back even further to prehistoric times, fighting dinosaurs. It just didn't do anything for me, to be honest.
Yeah. What I thought it was going to be based on the way it was set up is Lois is apprehensive of the relationship with Clark because she knows that Superman is always going to be called away to handle a crisis. And sometimes it's going to be a minor one that, he misses dinner for. Other times it might be a weekend, but there are other times where she knows, like, he's been gone for, exile, for instance, like where he's been gone for months and months, and she's unsure if she, as a partner in this relationship, if she's up to the task of handling, handling such what's the word for it? Uncertainty.
Yeah.
Such uncertainty, right? She wants to be able to predict. She wants to be able to rely on him, and she can't. And then, of course, Cable, the linear man, shows up and immediately shunts him off. And so her fear, the thing that she's thinking about at that moment, becomes reality. He's gone, and who knows when he's coming back. And that's why I think I thought that this would be a way to explore Lois and her feelings about what it means to be in a relationship with Superman. And the fact that didn't happen, it almost felt insulting in some ways. And I understand structurally why it was just a panel of Lois in each issue, but it felt to me a little insulting that thread wasn't the thing that we kept cutting back to. Like, let's see her. Like, let's have her sister, her father, the Daily Planet staff be like, what do you hear from Clark? What's going on? And she's got to like make stuff up because she's now covering for him. She's part of the lie, whereas she was always on the receiving end of it. Now for the first time, she's like, oh, right. I can't say where he really is. I've got to make something. I thought there was so much potential for story there and character exploration for her. And then of course the aftermath of, when he comes back, he's coming back to a Lois who's had time to process how that feels to be left behind. What does that do to the relationship? We really didn't get any of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, it's like not much time passes for her, but basically, she has that conversation with Booster where he's like, "Oh, I'll try to find out what's going on," and I'm like, "That's it." And then she's just kind of, she goes home. I like it. Again, there was a lot, and I guess we keep coming back to this with Lois in particular, where it just really felt like there were so many missed opportunities, and I don't know, not even, how do I put this? Not even missed opportunities from, I mean, yes, from a story and writing standpoint, but even just from a fan standpoint. It's like,
Yeah.
We talked about this in the earlier parts of this event here, but during the Byrne era, Pa Kent to help in an ill-advised attempt to try to help cover Clark's secret identity tells Lois that Jonathan and Martha basically also raised Superman. It basically raised them as brothers, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe there's an issue coming up where Lois is going to address this with Clark. I don't know, but it doesn't happen here. And I doubt it too. And it's the sort of thing where it's like, man, that would have been like, I would have wanted to read that conversation where she's like, remember that time your dad like tried to make me think like Superman was your stepbrother or foster brother? Like it just, I don't know. Again, there were so many opportunities, and I agree with everything you said, especially with Time and Time Again, because I think they really relied a lot on, I guess, what they thought was an appetite among fans, like to see Superman in these different time periods. Like that's really what this whole story hangs on. Whereas I think, to your point, it's like if they had really had that emotional undercurrent more fully developed, the story could have been more effective. I mean, I don't know, it's weird stuff too. It's like, when he gets flung into the past, and his vision is kind of out of whack. Like he's not at full capacity. I get that, but like, I don't know, he joins the circus for 2 months, and doesn't seem to bat an eye about. I don't know. It was just kind of, again, that was one of those stories that for all those years, I was like, oh, Time and Time Again. Like, I wonder what that's about. And I don't know how much thought I'll be giving to it once we're done recording this.
No, at the end of the day, I think we're both glad that we read it, we experienced it, because now at least we can talk about it rather
Yeah.
than saying, "Oh yeah, there's a big gap in my reading." I will say that I didn't see the circus issue because it must have been an issue of action that wasn't on the
Yeah.
app. But but I mean, what you described is plot. Superman is flung through different time periods, right? That is plot. And the more that I learn about what writing is, the more I learn that plot is the least important of all the story elements. So it's just a vehicle for allowing character to develop, for allowing conflict to develop, for allowing the themes to be explored. And so to talk about Time and Time Again and really have not much else to say about it other than to just recount the plot. Yeah, Superman's flung through different time periods. I think is pretty telling about how shallow the story is. And that's where the source of disappointment comes from.
Yeah, and again, I think the ingredients are there. I'm almost positive it was this storyline where I think it begins with Lois asking Clark about how he ages.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So this idea of time and how time passes and might pass differently for the two of them, like that's really fascinating. And I think there was more they could have mined there. And I guess maybe thematically that's what they were kind of like aiming for, but I don't think that was fully realized. I don't think that came together in any truly significant way.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that superhero stories work best as hyperbolic, hyperbolic representations of real life struggles, right? And I think Smallville is a great example of that, especially those early issues. And I know they get criticism for being formulaic and freak of the week, but you know, you take an episode like Heat in the first season, where the Heat vision first manifests, and it is a it's really a metaphor for the onset of a sexual awakening, the onset of puberty. except in a really awful, destructive, and embarrassing way. Um, it's the way that the writers in Smallville found to create perfect this perfect analogy for what that feeling is, right? And here was again, here are opportunities in these comics to demonstrate aspects of real relationships, right? Where two people are trying to figure out really how compatible they are, and what possible future they might have together. And again, what expectations they can reasonably have of each other in this life partnership, if that's what it's to become. And instead of mirroring those concerns in the action adventure part of the storyline, we get basically two completely different things just happening simultaneously. They're linked only because they're happening in the same comic.
Yeah. No, well said. Just in the interest of time, I guess, actually, before we talk about Mark of the Krypton Man, I guess a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Maybe this will be a little bit of a lightning round. There's an issue of Adventures, a Green Lantern team up, where Hal Jordan has been captured, and Superman reluctantly has to team up with Guy Gardner. It's a fun issue, but what was cool about it is, Hal Jordan has been imprisoned by this, ancient alien that's been stranded on Earth, and Superman has this moment where he's talking to the alien, and he's like, "Why didn't you just ask for help?"
Yeah,
like the alien was just trying to get off the world, and they ultimately help him be able to do that. And I thought that was really cool, and I like when you get instances where I even just the idea is sort of broached, because a lot of times you have these conflicts between the ostensibly the hero and the villain, but it's like, it's not always a matter of a hero and a villain. Like, there are different perspectives and different objectives and needs and things like that. And I don't know, just the fact that Superman was willing to entertain, like, hey, we've been at odds, but I can help you, and I wish you had just asked for help. I thought that was, I really appreciated that. I found that very refreshing.
I agree. Too often in superhero comics, and Superman in particular, including in this run, um, you know, some bad guy is doing something bad, and Superman sort of rushes in, fists a flying. And this was an odd moment where he took a step back from the physical confrontation and said, "Well, what really is the problem here? Can we work this out in a conversation rather than having to resort to fisticuffs?" And it works. And I wonder how much more it would work if more heroes did that. Although, again, in a visual medium, it's certainly never as exciting to watch a superhero to supervillain have a conversation as it is to watch them punch each other. But it was a refreshing moment. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's one of those things, I guess, like, I understand why you don't see more of it, but it was, I appreciated it in the moment.
Yeah.
A couple other just really quick things.
Yep.
So Man of Steel introduces the character of Keith, who, Perry and Alice will ultimately adopt, down the line. So it was cool to meet that character. I'm trying to think, 'cause I don't know whatever became of Keith, like past the 90s. I don't know if that character was ever really acknowledged, but I certainly remember from my own reading as a kid in the 90s. Like, I remember, them taking him in, and that whole bit.
I don't. I
Yeah.
have no. This was a completely new character to me, so I'm excited to see where it's going to go. I really don't have. I have no idea.
Yeah. I apologize for spoiling where it's going, but,
No, that's fine.
yeah,
He was new to me.
yeah. And then just kind of on the note of, I guess, the Smallville side of things, there was an interesting issue of Adventures, the drunk
When you're
driving.
going to talk. Yep.
Yeah, this week on a very special, on a very special issue of Adventures of Superman. Um, but yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really fascinating one. What was your take on that? Where we get, Clark visiting, this former classmate of his, who's been in a coma for like a decade, and his parents are going to pull the plug, and we sort of get the background on how that came to be. What was your take on that? Because as soon as I was starting to say it, I knew you knew exactly where I was going.
Yeah, I wrote in my notes that this was a standout issue because it's a perfect example of how you do a standalone fill-in issue, right? When you're not in the middle of a big storyline, when you don't have the action beats that you have to attend to, you just want to do something small and self-contained, right? And it has a message. I think if the audience for this are younger readers, 12, 13 year olds entering their teen years, going to be dealing with issues of potentially drugs and drinking and drug driving, and then this is a really great issue that allows, first of all, it allows Clark to be fully human. I don't think he appears as Superman at all in it.
Oh.
It's a lot of flashback to his younger days, so it's sort of like an untold tales kind of feel to it. And you're not, and there's a little bit of a mystery to it too, because you're not sure right away why he's there. He starts having the conversation with the parents of this person who at first aren't sure what to make of Clark. What are his intentions? Why is he here? Until he starts unfolding the story about how he and Lana and Pete had gone out and gone to this party, and this kid Scott Brubaker was partying hard, and was drinking, and they ended up all getting into a car together, and um, you know the other three were okay, but Scott was in a coma and had been this whole time, and of course Clark is feeling tremendous guilt here because he feels like he already had his powers at the time, which is why he emerged completely unscathed from the accident. But could he have done more? And he can't say that exactly to Scott's parents, but we know that that's what he's thinking about. Could he have prevented this? Could he have saved Scott? And all this, and ultimately he gets absolution from Scott's parents, and he wishes them well, and that's the end of the story. And it's just really beautifully done in one. I loved that issue. Loved it.
Yeah, as did I. I mean, I remember seeing the cover for it, and you see, the car crash and like Secrets of Smallville or something like that. I'm like, I think this will be interesting, and it delivered. I think for all the reasons you said. So, and then the other thing, I guess, Smallville related. In these issues, we see Pete and Lana now embark on a relationship, and Lana is dodging Clark's calls. He's trying to let her know about his engagement, and she doesn't want to hear anything about it. And then look, I know this is probably the Smallville fan in me, but the idea of that gets repeated often here about how Clark sees her as a sister sort of thing. I don't know. I feel like it does the character of Lana a little bit of a disservice, but and I don't know. Also like Clark too. I don't know. I mean, I like, not that it does him a disservice per se, but I guess I like the idea of there having been more of a romance. Not that he just kind of saw her in this way, because really from Man of Steel on, I mean, like when he reveals his secret to her, she thinks he's going to propose, and he's just like, hey, I have these powers, I'm leaving. Like, I feel like Lana really gets the short end of the stick, like unnecessarily so. And the other thing too, and I know I'm looking ahead a bit here, but like, now that she's with Pete, and she'll continue to be with Pete moving forward, but she never is really portrayed as being like happy with Pete. Or for the most part, maybe there are instances of that, but overall it's like she's never like really content. And I just feel like it's a character who they, kind of really has never done justice. Like I feel like she could, and I know I bring up Superman and Lois a lot, but I love the way Lana is portrayed on that show. And I don't want to give anything away for people who aren't caught up on it. But when the series begins, we see her husband, and he doesn't seem like the best guy. And my initial read on it was like, oh, it's just like Whitney and Lana
Right.
on Smallville. And it's like she's saddled with someone who's no good, and she'll have to ditch him. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but it's like her husband is like we get to see a lot of development with him over the course of the season. And I love the way she's portrayed there, because she's not pining over what could have been with Clark or anything like that. So I feel like that's the best version of Lana that we've gotten. And the Lana we get here, this like, the lovesick girl he left behind. Again, it's just not totally interested. So I'm a little, I guess, I'm not totally taken with that incarnation of the character.
Yeah, there's two disappointments that I have with her in this run. And one is just in and of herself, in that, here's a female character who's hinging all of her hopes and dreams and happiness on whether she's with this guy or that guy, or and of course it's just sort of poor lazy writing, for especially for female characters. I mean, she's there really just to further Clark's story, to give him another layer of conflict. He's got plenty of conflict in Metropolis. This is his conflict, back in Smallville. And the other one is that, again, I keep coming back to, with sort of wasted potential, because his romance with Lois is developing at the same time. Lana is poised to be a parallel to Lois. And if there is a romantic history with Lana, and if Clark had revealed his identity to her, he's had this experience, and it didn't last, it didn't go well, it didn't work, right? And that might help to explain why he may be slow playing things with Lois a little bit, why he doesn't want to reveal his identity, why he doesn't want to share this part of it, because what if it goes the way of Lana, and he doesn't want to make the same mistakes with this new person as he did with the other one. So it deepens both relationships at the same time, while keeping Lana and Lois as women with their own hopes and dreams, with agency and decision making power in their own lives, without being tied to a man, however super he may be.
Yeah, no, well said. And I guess it's just, I don't know, part of me is just like, well, what purpose does Lana serve in this telling of the story? Because it's like, if, like you said, if his experience with her in some way informs the way he's approaching his relationship with Lois, like, that's one thing,
Yeah.
but we don't really get that. And it's like, if this was his first love, well, that's something in and of itself, but you don't really get that either. It's like, she's just like this, like, girl back home who's pining over him, and he's like, oh, it's going to be awkward when I tell Lana. Like, I don't know it. And again, I realize a lot of this is informed by the way I see the characters and the relationship from watching the TV show. But I guess I also feel like, why, I don't know, why wouldn't you make them something a little bit more significant? It's like, it adds to his character and his history that he had this meaningful relationship in Smallville. Not that they were just friends and she wanted more and he just didn't really see her that way.
Yeah, I mean, she certainly comes across as an afterthought, as does Pete.
Yeah.
Because I think the writers always wanted to have an out in case they wanted to take the setting out of Metropolis, right? You can always bring Clark back to Smallville. You can get there in seconds. So, keeping Ma and Pa around, which you and I agree is always a good idea, and keeping Lana and Pete around as the Smallville contingent gives him something to do should they ever need to take him there. Which, again, I get. I get keeping them, but you can do the same thing while still keeping those relationships, deeper.
Yes. I know we talked about Lex, certainly with respect to Jerry. Again, I know you didn't get to read the issue where Lex seems to meet his demise, but,
Yeah.
Basically we find out, or Lex finds out that, he's not only did he lose his hand due to kryptonite poisoning, but now he's dying and his time is limited. And that's what kicks off that Krisis of the Crimson Kryptonite storyline. He wants to, eliminate Superman as a threat. Mxyzptlk provides him the means with the Red K that will put him on an even playing field, which Lex initially thinks will give him powers himself, but instead just strips Superman of his own powers. I did think that the resolution was pretty clever, right? Because Mxyzptlk always has rules, and the rule here was if you tell Superman that I was the one who gave you this, the effects will be reversed. And Lex ultimately tells Clark, and that's able to undo the effects of the magic. So I thought that was a nice little twist on it. It was also interesting to me, the parallel. As much as I had never read this story where, again, and we talked before about how Clark proposes poorly, but he proposes during the storyline while he's powerless. Again, as far as connection points, when Clark and Lois ultimately get married in '96, he's similarly powerless there too, following the events of the final night. So the little bit of symmetry there I thought was neat.
Yeah, I liked the Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite story. I'm a fan of stories where you get to see the superhero without powers, um, because it's I feel like it's easy enough to be a superhero when you have the powers, but how brave are you? How willing to put yourself in harm's way and sacrifice for others when you could be hurt or killed? So I'm generally a fan of that. Um, I I found that because Mixus is at the core of this, I found that it took some turns for the silly at times. Whereas if it had been either something that Lex had drummed up in a lab or something that he had found, and you there's something a little bit more sinister to it, and I found the out a little bit silly, especially because Lex like has a moment where he thinks it. He goes, "Well, I know the deal is off if I tell Superman, but this won't hurt because I'm telling Clark Kent." Wink, wink. Um, I found that took me out of the story a little bit, but I liked the general arc of the story.
Fair enough, and I will say though, I don't disagree with you that like it was weird that the red K came from Mixie, and I mean that might have been, again I'm speculating here, but obviously post Crisis they walked back. A lot of those, Silver Age in particular conventions, like the rainbow variety of kryptonite and things like that. And,
Right.
maybe the feeling was like, well, if we introduce like a red strand of kryptonite, then that just like opens the floodgates. But if it's a Mixus-Pitalik thing, we can kind of account for it that way. Maybe it was something like that. But yeah, I mean, seeing Clark struggle without his powers, I think that was the meat of that story.
Sure.
And there was an issue of Starman. I actually did read on the app where he goes to Starman for help, and then Starman continues to help in the pages of Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite. But it was cool. And Superman wears the armor, like he's still trying to be a hero even though he doesn't have his powers. So overall I thought that one was solid. I didn't find it overly compelling, but I found it, definitely there was more meat on the bone than time and time again. But as far as Lex himself, so, ultimately in the issue that you missed, we the audience, like, we don't know his plan. We just know that he doesn't, he doesn't have an heir. He doesn't have a way to save himself, that we know of. And so he takes to the skies in the new Lex Wing, and he forces the pilot to eject, and then he's going to continue on his own. And then the next thing we see, he's crashed into the mountains and is presumed dead. And in our next batch of issues, we'll find out what what actually became of him. But this
Right.
part, right?
Yeah, I know he's not gone.
Okay, but the form in which he returns?
I
You
yeah.
do, okay. And
Yeah.
this is, it's decades old story here. He will ultimately return in a cloned body, posing as his own son.
With a luscious mane of curly red hair.
Yes, exactly. And Australian, which it's funny because as a kid, by the time I'm reading in late '92, early '93, I don't know that his Lex Luthor II's Australian background was like really such a big part of the character. So I don't know that I don't think I ever read the character with an Australian accent in my head, but I will now, I guess, now that I know what the intention was. And so in
Right.
these issues, there's a handwritten will that's found by one of the LexCorp employees.
Right.
And then the board now is starting to try to, what we talked about before, like they're trying to figure out, what's going on, as they're trying to, find the heir to the LexCorp, empire. So
Right. I saw the will being brought in. That part was in the issues I read.
yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as the Lex of it all, I thought that again the Jerry parts, definitely were the most impactful. And moving forward, I'm excited to see the debut of Lex Luthor II. Again, he was the Lex when I started reading. So now to see kind of how that came to be, yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And then, Mark of the Krypton Man. Was this the high point for you of this batch?
It was one of them, and because it was so late in the run, I think I was ready for. I was ready to get something that was a little bit familiar. And as I said to you, when we messaged about it, this to me felt like a stylistic and thematic throwback to the stuff that we really loved from the previous run. I mean, the art style looked just like those issues. The fact that they were generally like double-sized issues that
Yeah.
featured like everyone on the art team. I mean, Jurgens was drawing and Grummett was drawing and Ordway was drawing. Everybody was sort of adding a couple of pages to the story, so they felt unified and all that, even though each one had a different writer. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I don't know that I felt ultimately at the end like it had paved any new ground, but it was fun.
Well, I agree with you. And I didn't really think about it until you said it, but you're right. And especially I'm really glad you said that, because if we're talking about, like what the purpose of these stories are, like what are they really about and what are they accomplishing? We've already had, the Day of the Krypton Man storyline where the Eradicator device is corrupting the mind of Kal-El and turning him into this cold, calculating, Kryptonian being, to now have that Kryptonian being, personified in the physical form of the Eradicator. It's like, I don't know what new, I think you're perfectly, I think your observation is apt. It's like, what new ground is that really breaking? It becomes then, you know what? I don't know, because I was pretty hot on this story, but now I'm like, you know what? You're kind of right, because it's like, now it's just a physical manifestation of the threat that previously was an internal one, and that
Right.
those usually are the more interesting ones. So I guess this was the reign of the Superman fan in me, who was just more excited to actually see, previously the Eradicator was a machine, and it's like, now, okay, we get to see the Eradicator as a being. But when you strip that away, it's like, I know, I don't, maybe it didn't really add as much as I initially thought it did.
Well, as a story, I feel like it's a bridge, right? It's a bridge between what we got originally, where it was the Eradicator device, and what will eventually show up in Reign of the Superman as the Eradicator, which looks to be a version of Superman, right? So this is this sort of intermediate step in that process. So it's satisfying for the longtime fans like us, just for being that. If it does nothing else, it's satisfying because it moves that particular character in that story forward just enough to set up what we know is coming. So like, I'll take it. It was fun. It looked great. And they were smart to kick it off in the debut issue of Superman Man of Steel, right? It was right at the end of that issue, which of course was its own double-sized issue, where the Eradicator, first appears to menace Superman again. So it was a great way, I think, to make sure that the readers knew that Man of Steel was just as much a part of the Superman family of titles as the others, right? We're going to give you the thing that you remember, the thing that the hallmark in some ways of this particular run of Superman comics from this creative team. We're going to put it in the debut issue right at the end, and then tell you to check out Superman next month to get the rest of the story. So I guess, it's successful in that end.
Yes, from a business standpoint, I think that made total sense. And for anyone not familiar with the story, again, previously Superman had thrown the Eradicator into the sun, the device, and now the Eradicator has created a form for himself, and dons a garb similar to what Superman had worn as the Krypton Man, and the Eradicator now sets out to fulfill its programming directive to preserve Kryptonian life. But and of course see Superman as an adversary, having been corrupted by, you know, the influence of Earth. It's so funny to me. I think about this. It always makes me laugh. You know, and again, everyone knows I love Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, but, you know, in that movie, you know, Zod, right? He's trying to, you know, terraform, or, you know, Earth into Krypton, and Eradicator here similarly is trying to recreate. The thing that's so funny to me is, like, planet exploded. Why would you try to replicate, like, the physical reality of Krypton? Like, why would you try to turn another planet into Krypton? A, this planet gives you powers, and B, it's like,
Mhm.
Krypton died. Like, it's not necessarily like a model to emulate. It always makes me laugh. It's so funny to me.
But don't we do this? I mean, don't human beings constantly seek what
Mhm.
is old and familiar? You know, as much as we can, we wrap ourselves in the blanket of the familiar. You know, we do this. We will go to extreme lengths to reject the new and the novel and embrace, you know, the comfort of the familiar. So in that sense, I think that, again, that, you know, there's your hyperbolic representation of what is a real human sort of failing in a lot of ways. So to place that onto the villains of these stories makes a lot of sense, right? This is not the right way to go. Maybe a healthy balance, right? Not to say to reject your past completely, or, you know, in favor of the new, but to embrace the new while still leaving some room for the old.
I don't disagree, but I guess counterpoint with Eradicator in particular, like, this is a character who prides himself on logic. So it's like,
Right.
you know, but overall, no, I do agree with you. There were some interesting bits in the story where, you know, the Eradicator kills, you know, a criminal, you know, and of course, you know, Superman disagrees, you know, with this choice. But it was interesting that, you know, the Eradicator is, you know, positioning himself as someone who is going to do what Superman does, but better, more effectively. And again, when we get to Reign of the Superman, that'll play out more. But I thought that was, you know, that was a neat angle, and maybe something, I guess, a little different than when Clark himself just had turned cold in the prior storyline. It's like, now, you know, you had, you know, this tension play out differently. It made me laugh when, I don't know, was that, I can't remember exactly when in the story, but, um, you know, Superman seeks to intervene when the Eradicator is going to dispense his brand of justice or whatever. And as Superman's, you know, flying in, like, one of the civilians is like, "Oh, this Killjoy is here." And it just stood out to me because it's like, and this is not the first time in Superman stories. It's like, how quickly these people forget, like, everything he's done for them.
Well, that's what necessitated that article that Lois wrote, because she recognizes this ungratefulness among the population, and the complacency of, you know, and I think you brought this up in one of your recent episodes. I think the For Tomorrow episode, where, you know, would people in a real metropolis come to just expect Superman to swoop out of the sky and rescue them, and therefore become more reckless, you know, with their daily life, take more risks because they just know that he's got their backs, and you know, that struck a chord with me when you had said it, with the pastor, which I thought was a great discussion, by the way.
Thanks.
And maybe that's you know, that maybe there's a little bit of that going on here, you know, too.
Yeah. And I mean, again, as far as, I mean, just plot wise, how this wraps up, you know, Mr. Z, who had appeared in an earlier issue of Superman, you know, Professor Emil Hamilton is studying the Mr. Z's gem, which can, you know,
Mhm.
capture someone's essence, and ultimately that's how they trap the Eradicator. So at least the Mr. Z stuff paid off a little bit, I guess, because otherwise, I you know, wouldn't necessarily place that character in, you know, the pantheon of, you know, the Superman villains.
Uh,
But yeah, you know, I guess overall, as far as this leg of the reading project, you know, I was not as taken with it as I was what we talked about last time. I'm really appreciative of this conversation because I think in getting your take and in fleshing out my own thoughts over the course of this conversation. I mean, I think I have a better sense of why, and I think we've addressed that. And I am hopeful that, maybe the next, the not the last part of this event, but the last leg that you and I will be doing together, and the last leg before death. Hopefully we'll be a little bit more impressed by that. I don't know. I know Panic in the Sky is kind of like the big storyline of this next batch. So we'll see. But again, on a positive note, they're all still very readable. I think the greatest sin is that, like, some of them are, more forgettable. I know I've used that word a few times, but I guess that's kind of, like, when I think back now on the 100+ issues that you and I have read and discussed, it's like, I Exile comes to mind, and, some of those other stories. A lot of this stuff, probably not, or if it does, it's not necessarily for the best reason, but, still readable, still engaging enough. And again, I think they did a really strong job in establishing the supporting cast and their storylines, and you're invested. And so even if, the A plot of Superman fighting Parasite, or Toy Man, or like whatever it might be. Although those issues actually I thought were on the stronger side.
Yeah.
But yeah. If you take one of these other ones that we had talked about, like the Baron Sunday issue, that's one you probably didn't read, because that was one that I bought on eBay. Yeah. Baron Sunday is in Belle Reve, and he is seemingly killing other inmates, but really he's just controlling them. And kind of, it was what it was. But even an issue like that, it's like you're invested in the characters, and you're following along. And, again, even if the action part, kind of doesn't add much, you're still along for the ride. And so, that's not nothing. I mean, that does mean something to me as a reader. So I appreciate that. You had mentioned the Sinbad 3-parter. I skipped that. I skipped 6 issues here. Yeah, everyone will have to forgive me, but in the interest of time and interest, I suppose, I did skip, because they were fill-ins. There was a 3-part Sinbad fill-in, although Kurt Swan did the art, which is something. But there was that, and there was also the 3-part Red Glass storyline, another fill-in after time and time again. I skipped both of those. Was there, I guess, anything in those stories that you it would really be worth taking a look at?
I mean, the fact that when you had asked me, when you had told me that I could skip the Red Glass story, and at that point I'd read the whole run, and I said, I don't remember a Red Glass. And then, of course, I realized I had actually read it. It really was that forgettable. I mean, the entire creative team is a fill-in creative team, giving the regular creative team a much needed break. They needed that. And the same with the Sinbad contract, which was written by William Messner Loebs and drawn by Kurt Swan. I found them both to be pretty forgettable, if for no other reason than they just were really light on the Superman. It was focused on other characters and not the regular sort of supporting cast. Like, I'm okay if Clark Superman takes a back seat so that Lois or the Whites or the Kents gets a little bit of time, but this wasn't that. And so I found myself kind of going through it very, very quickly. And so I would say you didn't miss much in those issues. I will call out one issue that I did particularly like in terms of its portrayal of supporting cast, and that was an event in most young new couples' lives when their parents meet for the first time.
Yes.
We have the Jonathan and Martha Kent meeting Sam and Ella Lane. And I don't know if this is on purpose. Are they Sam and Ella? Like Sam and Ella? I don't know, because they're portrayed as kind of like, especially Sam, like, when he starts getting on a political rant, like, Lois describes it as like poisonous.
I had never made that connection, but probably that makes sense. That would track.
So there's, a dinner in Smallville with no, I'm sorry. No, I think the Lanes host it. And, of course, Clark and Lois are so nervous that they're not going to get along because the Kents are clearly sort of more liberal minded and the Lanes are much more conservative. And Sam does go on one of his political rants and to his credit, Jonathan Kent is just so good natured and so open minded that he just takes it, and they have a really nice evening, even though Clark and Lois have to go out and cover a story, and Superman has to intervene. So I really like that little moment. And the only last thing that I would say is, for as much as I had I've become really enamored of the steady creative team who, but for those couple of fill-ins, really are doing some heavy lifting. Some of them writing and drawing. I thought it was really nice to see Bob McLeod jump on, who gave us, I think, my favorite cover of the whole run of Clark sort of passed out in a graveyard with a piece of kryptonite next to him with this eerie green glow. I love that cover so much. So it's nice to see Bob McLeod jump on and to see Louise Simonson and Jon Bogdanove join the team on Man of Steel. I've always been a fan of Louise Simonson's writing from the X-Men world. And Jon Bogdanove as well. I just think he does really great work in a style that's pretty different than what Jurgens is doing and Ordway is doing or Grummett is doing, and it was a really nice addition to the Superman family. So for where we are in our reading, I say welcome aboard for those creators.
I will share. I've never been a huge fan of his art, but it's just a matter of taste. Like, it's not like it's not like, oh, I don't think he tells a story well. It's not that. His style, that blocky style, was never really for me. But your point is well taken. I mean, it did stand out. And I guess to sort of bring this whole thing full circle, for as much as we talk about like the house style and how cohesive it was, I don't know. Like, here is an example where I'm sure they could have gotten an artist whose style was more closely aligned with the others, and they didn't. So, that is, I guess, an exception to what we were talking about, where there is an instance here where you do get a little bit of an outlier and someone doing something a little different.
Yeah. So good point.
Well, it's funny because heading into this, I was like, I don't know that I have as much to say about this as the last episode. And here we are at 2 hours and 15 minutes. So, as once again, I thank you very much. This was I really had a lot of fun doing this. So I appreciate you reading and us having this chat. And, we still have 3 more installments of this Krisis Till Death event. You will be here for the next installment, where we'll do another 50 plus issues, and we'll stop right before Death of Superman. And then returning guest Bernie Gerstmeyer is going to be my guest for Death and Funeral, which will be part 7, and then Reign and Return, which will be part 8. So that's what's still to come. And again, we are weekly. So you and I will be recording in about another few weeks, but people will hear it 1 week from now. And this has just been an absolute blast. So again, thank you very much, Scott.
Always my pleasure.
And thank you to the audience. I really, really hope that you've been enjoying this run of episodes. It's really, I've been enjoying, I think hopefully that's coming across in these episodes, that I've really, really been enjoying this process. So I hope you've been enjoying the episodes. Make sure that you come back in 1 week for part 6. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Art by Greg Schiegel, music by Basic Printer. Join the conversation by becoming part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network Facebook group. Follow Digging for Kryptonite on Instagram and Twitter, and visit flatsquirrelproductions.com to explore more of my film and podcast projects.